now badly bruised.
Just books.
Okay, I've got 6 o'clock sharp. So, if you want to hang around, you're welcome to.
No, I'm going to Pathfinder 2.0. But I appreciate that.
Okay.
I could sit in the back and snark at you.
You could, but I'll throw things.
What about Torpedo Squadron 8? Oh, sorry. Did I say that out loud? Wait, was that the right number?
Go away.
Oh, okay. Torpedo 8?
Yes.
That wasn't the right number?
Yes.
So, all right, my name's Terry Sophie, and I'm going to be talking about the Dyatlov Pass Incident today. Give you a little bit of background. I was an urban and rural search and rescue person, mostly underwater search and rescue, but we did rural and urban as well. I was St. Charles County's team vice manager, and I was on the board of directors. So I was on the team for, I guess, about 6 to 8 years. I did underwater crime scene, which included 2 capital cases. So I do have a little bit of background that specifically talks to investigating crime scenes or scenes for missing persons. Okay? So the Dyatlov Pass Incident, we'll just get right into it. Everybody here's read at least a little or heard at least a little. Okay. Okay. So January, February 1959, Northern Ural Mountains, political climate, it's the end of the Stalinist era in the Soviet Union. The group overview. A lot of times this group of 9 people gets called ski tourists, which is kind of a little, shorts them a little bit. What they were they were very experienced people, and they were actually going for want of a better term, their merit badge in winter ski travel. Okay? Dyatlov, the team leader, was going for the highest level of that, and the rest of his team was going for the level below that. So these were very, very experienced people. They were not tourists, they were not tenderfeet, they knew their business, they'd been out before. Dyatlov had actually been on this route, I believe, the previous year. So it's not like they were people who just went in the woods and didn't have any business doing it. They were people who knew their business, were equipped for their business, and had substantial experience in what they were doing. Okay. Their intent was to travel to an area to which, again, Dyatlov had previously journeyed and returned. They needed to meet certain criteria to win their certifications, and this trip would have given that to them. There's one survivor. His name is Yuri Yudin. He was 22 at the time. He dropped out of the group right before they left civilization. He hit the last stop. He had a number of pre-existing medical conditions, including rheumatism and some back and leg problems. He liked to hike for the same reason that Teddy Roosevelt liked to get out in the woods, to kind of help him manage his pain. Well, this trip out, it wasn't working for him, so he dropped out so he wouldn't be a burden to his teammates. So, except for Yuri Yudin, who's back in the bottom, here's our other 9 people who are on this trip, and from which they, of course, are not going to come back. This is the leader, Igor Dyatlov. He was well respected. The group was mostly from a university in Svalovor. Sorry, I can't pronounce Russian names, but so they were mostly university students or recent graduates. They were part of a ski tourism club at that institution. The thing about it is, during the Stalinist era, young communists would often be members of these types of groups. It showed your loyalty to the party, it showed your personal courage, it showed your inner strength, and all those kinds of things that the Communist Party really, really looked for in people. I know, look, there's people here. So he was the team leader. Okay. Zena was 22. She was a tough lady, tough young woman. She had been bitten by a venomous reptile on a previous trip and had walked out. So not a typical wimp, but somebody who really could handle and manage her pain, could manage stress, and could manage being in a bad situation and getting out of it without panicking. Lyuda was a couple years younger. On a previous trip, she'd been accidentally shot. Okay? They had to carry her 50 miles out of the wilderness, but from witness statements, she was actually the person who kept people's spirits up as they dragged her out on the stretcher. Okay? So again, another person that you would not expect to panic, that you would expect to be able to handle not only your typical situations, but a pretty extreme situation. Yes, sir?
Sounds like a pretty unlucky group of people, though.
You know, I never thought of it that way. But, I mean, how lucky can you be to live in Stalinist Soviet Union to begin with? So then we have Yuri. There's a lot of Yuris on this trip. There's another Yuri. Most of these males were engineering students. The women were also engineering students or already graduated in engineering. So they're, for the most part, highly technical people who have technical training. And again, all of them had significant experience in the wilderness, particularly the wilderness that they would be going into, this Russian wilderness. So let's talk about this guy. So, as you can tell, this guy is a lot older than everybody else. He's also a veteran of the Great Patriotic War, what we call World War II, and he was an assault engineer in the Red Army. So here's a guy who's spent most of the early 1940s dodging Nazi bullets in the middle of the snow, probably. He is a very tough guy. Very tough, very experienced. He survived a lot of things that a lot of other people didn't. So we've got at least 4 out of the 9 people, Dyatlov, the 2 women, and this gentleman, who have a proven track record of survival. A proven track record of being able to deal with extreme situations and come out of them successfully. And that's one of the things that makes this incident so different and so intriguing, is the people who are involved in it are not the people you would expect not to come back. These are the people you would in fact expect to come back. Okay, so let's talk about the route and the journey. Okay, so they start down here. Okay, somebody can pronounce that for me. Sverdlovsk.
Sorry.
Okay.
It's Sverdlovsk.
Yes, what she said. Okay, and then they're going to go all the way up, as I trip over this, to what is now known as Dyatlov Pass. Most of the way they're going to travel on trains, on trucks, and then they're going to make the final journey from the last point, which is Vizhny. I can pronounce that one. Vizhny. And from Vizhny, they're going to take a well-known route that actually has some pre-provisioning on it. There's a number of huts that have supplies on it that they can expect to use. Go up there and come back. Then they're going to, when they get back to Vizhny, no later than February 12th, they're going to telegram back to the university and let everybody know that they're safe, and they're going to hitch a ride back on trains and trucks and whatnot. So this is them typically traveling via a truck, whoever would pick them up, because in the Soviet Union, everybody's a comrade. So this was not an unusual means of travel for them. It was certainly not anything that posed a significant risk to them compared to any other types of travel. And if people have questions, go ahead and ask them. I'm very informal, so just feel free to ask me anything. Yes, sir.
So they were supposed to be back February 12th. When did they leave?
Okay, they left in late January. So they get to their final campsite. They're about 10 kilometers off course. It's in an open area uphill from the tree line. It's packed snow, possibly 2 to 3 feet deep. It's on a moderate to minor slope, and the slope faces the east-northeast. Some general anomalies. They're off course. They're actually in a place they shouldn't have been. Yes?
How did they prepare it? Because I didn't, in the images, it didn't look like they had like food stores and everything. Were they planning on hunting when out?
No, like they said, they actually, they humped a lot of their stuff with them. And I'll show you a picture of what they looked like when they were were traveling on skis, but there were these pre-positioned things too, that had huts that had food and supplies in
Oh,
them
okay.
that they could expect to use.
And I heard you say huts, I didn't realize they were supplied.
Yes, they were supplied. Okay, and they likely were not burning the tent the stove in the tent that night. Okay, it was a wood burning stove. They didn't have any wood in the tent, and from what the searchers say when they discovered the campsite, that it did not appear that there was ash or anything in that. Okay. So one thing that I find interesting is they knew the temperature was going to be sub-zero, like 20 to 50 below zero. And they were comfortable in a tent without a stove burning. So this is one reason why I don't hike. Okay. So let's look at some of the photos. See, you can see that they've got heavy packs. So they're packing a lot of their food in because they knew what they were doing. It wasn't like they were going to run out of food or supplies. One thing they had almost none of was alcohol. They found one small flask and all the equipment that was abandoned at the site. So the discussion about them being drunk is pretty much easily debunked. Yes, sir.
Okay, so they had only the one flask with them,
Right.
and we're sure they were Russians.
Sigh. Okay, so here's them setting up the last night. This is another photo from the roll that was recovered from the scene. And you can see that they're very well equipped for this. You can see their packs are up here, and they're pretty substantial. So it's not like they're going to run out of supplies or anything like that. Yeah.
Are these sort of like pleasure, like, oh, this is doing, or is this like, hey, this is our proof of going up the mountain?
No, mostly they took the cameras for pleasure.
Okay.
So there were several cameras on the expedition, and I'm going to talk a little more about one at length, but this is the one that was shot at the night that they camped for the last time. The really frustrating thing is everybody on this trip journaled. They all journaled first thing in the morning. So we have no journal entries from their last night. So we don't know what their status was. We know up until that point there was no conflict in the party. They didn't seem to be having any distress outside of what could be expected. And honestly, these people weren't distressed by this kind of stuff. This was what they did for fun. So they dug this. Yes, ma'am.
Is this trip for fun?
Yeah. Well, it was okay.
Seems so weird.
Well,
And I'm Russian, so like.
but we know that people do extreme sports. People climb Mount Everest. People
Fair enough.
do all that stuff that I won't even watch on TV because it's just too, strenuous. But so, and I will talk about this a little bit. They were actually going for certification to basically be guides. Dyatlov was going for the highest level of certification. He was a team leader. And the rest of the people in the group were going for lower levels of certification. So, but that was something that was very much a part of the Soviet lifestyle, part of the Communist Party. Many of these people were very dedicated communists. So they would do things that would make them look good in terms of becoming a good party member. And this was one of those things. Okay, it showed self-reliance and a lot of the other personal attributes that the Communist Party said they liked. Okay. So, group failed to make planned contact on February 12th. A rescue party sets off from the university on February 20th. They get up to the campsite on the 26th. So again, they're taking the train and the bus and the truck and whatever they can get, because it's not an official government rescue party. It's a, hey, our friends haven't been heard from, go grab your stuff and let's go up and look for them. So, the scene is discovered. They get there, and we'll talk more about the condition of the tent. They find 5 bodies on the 26th when they get up there. 2 are down in the wood line, and I've got some maps and drawings so it'll make more sense. And those 2 are basically stripped almost naked. They have some burns on their feet and their hands, some scratches. Okay, so 2 are found downslope from the tent. 3 are found on what it looks like to be a path from that location down slope back to the tent at various intervals where apparently they died trying to get back to the tent. The other 4 are not found until May 4th. They're found 75 meters away from the tree in a very deep ravine near a what looks like a snow shelter that they had dug. So here's a map. Okay. Here's the tent. Here's the peak of the mountain. Again, here's one of those storage locations that they expected. It's right on their route. Okay. So we have the 4 people here. We have the 2 who died at the tree line, and we have the 3 who died coming back. Okay. These 3 died of hypothermia. These 2 died of hypothermia. 1 of them died of hypothermia, and 3 of them died of extreme trauma. Yes?
Now, I remember you saying something about how they were not on the route that they were supposed to. Were they trying to get to the top, or like how?
No, they were trying to get through here.
Oh, okay.
So, but they were somewhere between 1 and 10 kilometers off route. The footprints, let's see what I've got next. Okay, so here's another view of it. Okay. And this has the scary thing that was in the sky that frightened them, or didn't. Okay, so here's the tent. Here's the path they took. Traces disappear, and then again, down slope, the victims are found. Okay. Does that all make sense so far? Don't lie to me, because none of this makes sense. Okay. Evidence at the campsite. The tent was apparently cut from within. Okay. Campsite was in generally good condition. The tent was partially collapsed. It had a light covering of snow on it. Footprints headed directly downhill from the tent site to the wood line to this big cedar tree. Footprints indicated that 8 to 9 people were in socks or a single shoe, or perhaps barefoot, as they moved from the tent down to the wood line. Tracks were in a group and indicated that people were walking and not running. Okay. This is what the tent site looks like when the searchers get to it. You can see it's partially collapsed, but you can also see that the skis that were in that other picture are still in pretty much the exact same position they were in when that picture was taken the night whatever happened. So again, here's another diagram. This is how the tent was set up. There is some discussion in some of the media sources that due to the apparent wind direction, that the stack for the stove should actually have been on this end and not that end. But if they weren't going to burn it, it may not have mattered anyway. Okay. So when they get there, okay, the tent has been partially collapsed. But all the things in the picture are still in the same general vicinity, very close, if not exactly the same. Yes?
On the tent, how do you tell the slashing was coming from inside to outside?
You can actually tell, if you take a knife to a piece of fabric, you can tell which way that knife penetrated into the fabric. Okay? So, if somebody has a knife, can I borrow your sweatshirt?
No. Well, you can tell it from a wall because the structures that are left there have that.
It's pushed out, not pushed in.
Right.
And then you can tell which direction the slash was made in. So, you go try it at home, but you can actually do it. Okay? So, and again, here's a picture of the tent that had been reset up for the investigation, and you can see where it had been cut. Yes, ma'am.
So do they know like how it was cut? Like was it a knife? Was it more like a claw or something like
It was a knife. So the party, of course, did have knives. I mean, you don't go in the woods without them. So, and here's another view of it. It shows where the cuts were. So it actually cut out entire sections, not just a slit and go through. It's a section, because I'm getting out of this tent in a hurry. There are some jackets, flashlights. The ski poles were used to support the tent. And the skis were also used to support the tent. So, and that was pretty much the way it was done. Looking at the original picture, there was nothing odd about the campsite the night before, except maybe the placement of the stove. Okay. After the group evacuates the tent, they get to the tree line and they start a fire. Okay. So, if they were undergoing some sort of panic behavior, by the time they get to the tree line, they have stopped the panic behavior. Because now they're taking a rational course of action, which is to start a fire. Another thing they do is somebody climbs a tree about 5 meters up to possibly get a better vantage point. There's been a discussion that they maybe were trying to see where the tent was, which I think is not that likely because you just follow your footprints back to it. Okay? But I don't understand why you run from the tent and then you get down there and you start a fire. What kept them from going back to the tent at this point, which is the most rational course of action they can take? Yes?
So let's pretend that there's like a monster in the tent, right? So if there's a monster in the tent, they can't come back to the tent, and the monster sits there and it eats their food and it makes a home in the tent. Then they're like watching it from the tree, like, is it gone? Is it gone? Is it gone? It's not gone. Then they start dying. Then they're like, okay, now we need to build a shelter so we can wait for it to leave and you can come back to the tent, and then they'll die.
Okay, but how about this? Why is there not a single footprint of that monster anywhere at this scene?
And why were they walking, not running?
So,
Yeah, cutting out like an actual section is a lot slower than slash and jump out.
and how did the monster get in the tent in the first place? So,
They found coats in the tent.
They found
How many
coats in
of-
the tent.
How many of them still had their coats on?
None. They were basically in what they would be wearing in their sleeping bag. Okay, so if you're an experienced camper, you know you don't wear your clothes in the sleeping bag because they get wet overnight, so you leave them out. Okay, so all their stuff was out, not in the sleeping bag with them, and whatever happened so rapidly that they were unable to grab any of that gear that was right by them and get out of the tent with it. They left it all behind. Also, none of the food was eaten. So, okay, they found all the food that should have been there was there.
Was there any indication of like weather patterns?
It was snowing, but that wasn't unexpected. Okay,
Like
so
snow blowing?
no, it was because I think we'll see a better picture of it from one of the last pictures that they took, and you can see that they're skiing through the snow. But again, not unexpected in late January, early February in Siberia in the Ural Mountains.
You mentioned there were no tracks from any kind of monster that was there. Wouldn't the snow have covered that up?
The snow didn't cover their tracks up. So their tracks were clearly present at the scene. Now they lose the tracks downhill, okay, which is not unexpected either because tracks can come and go. But again, their tracks were the only tracks present anywhere near the tent. Okay. The two by the fire were found stripped. They were seated with the backs to a tree. They died of hypothermia. One thing that a lot of the skeptics talk about is a thing called paradoxical undressing. Okay? Paradoxical undressing is found in the final stages of hypothermia, where your body for some reason says you're really hot and you start taking your clothes off. Okay? That's not what's going on here. It's demonstrably not what's going on here. Okay? What you see in this event is as people die, they get stripped of their clothes by the people who are still alive, who are then wearing that clothes. So it's not paradoxical undressing at all. Okay? These two guys found dead, sitting up next to the trees. It seems obvious to me and to a lot of other investigators that they perished, they were stripped of their clothes, and they were left in a dignified position by their friends. Yes, sir?
The previous conclusion, I don't see as quite certain. What if it was the paradoxical undressing, but after those people took their clothes off and died, the other people...
I mean, it could have been, but these people are with their party.
You would say.
And so that could have happened, okay? But whatever happened, paradoxical undressing is not what happened to the rest of the party, and it's probably not what killed these guys.
Okay, so in that case, did they find bodies that were wearing multiple layers of clothes?
Yes, they did. They found bodies that were wearing the clothes of people who were dead, who died first. Because you have a pretty good order of who dies first. These 2 guys by the tree die first. Okay? Then the 3 people who head up back to the tent perish as they try and get back to the tent. And then the 4 other people, 3 of whom die of extreme trauma, and 1 of whom dies of hypothermia, all die in the ravine about 75 meters away, and they apparently died a little bit later.
How far was the tent from the tree?
About 500 meters. Somewhere between a kilometer and 500 meters. So, okay. Weird stuff about the bodies. Radioactivity was found on some of the bodies. Okay. Now, what I find strange about this is not that they found radioactivity on the bodies, but that somebody actually swung a meter on it. Okay. So, the other thing I do in my real life is I work for the Department of Energy as a safety manager. Okay. So I work with rad material all the time. I work with contamination all the time. Okay. You don't swing a meter unless you think you're going to find something. Why they even had a meter is very questionable. Why that was brought to this autopsy or anything like that it's not standard practice. It's very odd. The skeptics, one of the skeptic responses to the finding of radioactivity on these bodies is that it came off the thorium in the lantern mantles. Okay, we in the U.S. use thorium lantern mantles. If you look at the pictures of the Russian ones, they did not have lantern mantles, so there would have been no thorium on them. Okay, so you would not have had that radioactive source. Okay, extreme trauma was found on 3 bodies. Cause was not ever determined. 2 died of crushed chests. Thibault Bernals was killed by a bilateral skull crushing event. Yes, or something. Okay. Dubinina's tongue was removed. Blood was found in her stomach. There is discussion from eyewitnesses that the bodies of the funerals had a deep tan on them and were highly discolored. Okay. So first, one thing about eyewitness testimony. It is the least reliable of any evidence that can be given. Okay. So a lot of times they'll talk about all the evidence is circumstantial. All forensic evidence is circumstantial evidence. All right? The eyewitness testimony is the stuff you've really got to question. The circumstantial evidence can be freaking rock solid. Yes, sir.
So do we know if the blood in Dubinina's stomach was hers?
Yes.
It was hers?
Well, as far as we know, it was.
Okay, so
Okay. And it's not unexpected given it's not unexpected given the amount of trauma she had happened to her. Okay. Weird stuff about the incident. The area is known as Dead Mountain to the Mansi, and the Mansi are the local tribal people that live in the area, and they apparently have a lot of superstitions about this. Lights or orbs were noted in the sky by a lot of other groups in the area during this period. Although the group escaped the tent with almost nothing, that gentleman, Zolotaryov, had a camera with him. It was found on his body. Unfortunately, he was one of the 4 people who was in the ravine, spent 2 months in and out of water from snowmelt, and the film in it was useless. Okay. Also, the area had been used for the Soviet military for testing. So, bits and pieces of Soviet hardware could be found in the region.
I'm sorry, hardware, military, nuclear?
No one's really sure.
Okay.
Again, this is the Soviet Union in 1959, and they ain't going to tell you what it is.
Could not explain
Why
that.
are you asking that, comrade? Okay. So theories, there's a whole bunch of theories, right? And I'm going to try and go through either the most popular or the most likely or the ones that I decided I wanted to talk about. First is the avalanche. Okay, this is the skeptics' number one theory, and it is complete and utter hash. Okay, there is almost no way that this played any role in what happened that night. Okay, it's a nice little skeptic theory because it's really rational and it's totally mundane, and it doesn't have anything to do with what happened here. First off, the slope's not steep enough for an avalanche. Second, there's no avalanche evidence at the campsite. Third, there's never been a snowslide recorded in that area. Fourth, the reaction from the party is completely inconsistent with your immediate action to an avalanche. Okay? If you are about to be hit with an avalanche, you don't run downhill, you run sideways. So, and that's really well known. Okay? That's been known forever. Okay? So we're not talking about, hey, this is new technology or this is a new technique that's come out in the last 30 years or something. So these experienced people, if it had been an avalanche, the trackways would have gone sideways, and it probably would have been 4 going one way and 5 going the other way. It would not have been all 9 of them headed straight downhill. Okay? It doesn't make any sense. So also, if it's an avalanche, why did the party wait so long to go back to the tent? If it's an avalanche, it either happened or it didn't. You know you're going to die if you just stay out of that tent. You might die if there's another avalanche, but your only hope of survival is getting back to that tent. Okay? So why didn't they go back to the tent? Okay. There's the big chunk of ice, or the little avalanche theory, that some big chunk of ice rolled down the hill and hit the tent and scared everybody and they all ran away. Again, I'm not buying it. I think it's, there's no evidence at the campsite. The slope really isn't steep enough for a big snowball. Again, the party's reaction is completely out of what you would expect them to do as trained and experienced people. Yes, people can panic and do stupid things, but for most people, if you have training and something bad happens, you do what you're trained to do because emotionally it's the easiest thing for you to do. And the immediate action for an avalanche, or my tent just got hit by a big snowball, is to run sideways. Okay? Party conflict. This is another good skeptic answer, and you can construct a really plausible narrative because I read one on the internet. The two guys who died first get in a fight. They slash at each other with their knives, and they end up running out of the tent naked. The rest of the group follows them down there. By then it's too late. But again, why doesn't the rest of the party return to the tent is one really good thing. Second, there's really no evidence for this. If you look at all the journal entries and all the photographs and everything like that, these people apparently liked each other and got along really well. So there's no motivation for it. I've read a lot of things on the net that they were drunk. There's no evidence for that. All the coroner's inquests showed that there was no alcohol in their systems, and no empty alcohol containers were found in the tent. At one point, one of the guys in his journal says, "Gosh, I wish we had some alcohol with us for medicinal purposes if we needed it." Okay, and one small flask was found full. So, yes, they're Russian, but no, they weren't drunk. Okay. So there's a lot of negative evidence. Also, once they get down to the tree line, apparently they're all cooperating for at least some period of time. At least until some of them start dying. Okay? So there's no positive evidence for this, and there's a lot of indirect negative evidence that says this is not really what happened. Now, could it have happened this way? Yes. Okay, it could have. You can't prove it didn't. Okay, the Mansi. So maybe the local tribal peoples were pissed off that their sacred dead mountain had been violated by these Soviet skiers and killed them. Okay? Again, there's absolutely no evidence for this. It's nice to say it. There's a couple of people in Russia who really firmly believe this now, but there's no evidence for it. There's no tracks there. The wounds are not indicative of being killed by native peoples. I mean, they're not shot, they're not stabbed, the trauma was crushing. It wasn't just, I hit you with a baseball bat or this young lady's pipe that she's carrying with her. Okay? None of that. It's way more force than that. It was described as basically being in a car wreck. Okay? So, unless the Mansi ran them over with cars, which seems unlikely, there is no evidence for this either. There's no motive. The Mansi are generally a very peaceful people. There's no opportunity because they're not at the site. And there's no means because they couldn't have inflicted that level of trauma on people. So you don't have anything for them. Now, the big monster theory. Okay? Pros. There is a Yeti legend in the region. Such a beast would have the strength to cause those traumatic injuries. And I will show you a photo that purports to show a Yeti-like creature following the party. Okay? All right? We already talked about some of the cons to this. One is there are no Yeti footprints. And we all know that the big thing about Yetis and big feet is they leave footprints everywhere. It's the only way we know they exist.
What other animals are known to be near it?
There's probably snow leopards. There's probably bears. But it's pretty desolate up there. So I've never really taken a look at that. That would be a good question, but again, no tracks are found, so it's not. It really kind of becomes a non-issue.
When the bears be hibernating at that time of year.
Maybe they woke one up. They get angry. So this is the picture that purports to show the Russian Yeti. It's kind of a scrawny-looking Yeti. It looks like a person in a snowsuit.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks just like everybody else in those pictures. So I think it's really weak. Probably the best suggestion is one of the crew was messing with everybody else, because that seems to be the way this gang rolled. Was they were pretty much in each other's pockets and pretty comfortable with each other and played little jokes on each other, stuff like that. So, or maybe he went and took a whiz behind a tree and somebody took a picture of him. Okay, so again, I'm pretty sure that is not a Yeti. Soviet weapons tests. The Soviet Union would not be above killing 9 hikers to keep a weapons system secret. Okay? It wouldn't even have, the KGB or the NKVD would not have for a minute said, oh, we probably shouldn't do this. They'd have been all about it. Okay? So, one of the best solutions to this is the entire final campsite was staged. Okay? That troops came in, they killed everybody, then they moved the tent, put it in a new place, totally constructed the final campsite basically from whole cloth. Were very careful to erase their tracks and put down believable tracks and lay out the bodies and do all that. The only problem with that is those pictures from the night before, how did that get done? Unless the Soviets unless whoever killed them actually took those pictures too, which is pretty good, okay? I mean, you're as a special ops person, if you make that level of commitment to this incident, you're a 99%er right there, okay? Yeah.
With that, or going further into that as a potential explanation, this was an area where hikers always went, right?
Right,
A lot of people,
right.
So it wasn't that they necessarily stumbled across a particular area.
Right.
So that would not have likely been the case.
It was not a restricted area.
So if they stumbled across somebody who happened to be doing something there by random choice.
Right.
And so somebody said, why leave the bodies at all? Just take everyone away, and people just totally disappeared. And nobody has to figure out the evidence. It seems to be an easier way if you're going to get rid of somebody that you decide you don't like.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of, but again, it's hard to get in the mind of an NKVD guy, and I'm not even sure I really want to get in there. So it could be, I mean, they could say, we don't want them looking that much in this area, so we better give them something to find quickly. So, and again, this is just a construct. There's no evidence for it. And like any good conspiracy, the fact that there's no evidence for it is really good evidence for it.
Well, if you're going to stage something, why stage it to look like a total mystery? Why not stage it to make so that it looks like one member of the group killed the others, or you know?
Who knows? Or that you find two convicts who escaped from a gulag and you have them kill everybody.
Yes, exactly.
And then Ranger, whatever Russian Ranger shows up and kills the two guys. And,
yeah.
oh, it was horrible. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah.
Is there any evidence that Russians were playing with psychedelic drugs as a form of attack or anything like that? Does something like this have?
There's no evidence of that, okay? Again, there's lights in the sky, but there's no evidence. And again, what makes it interesting is how quickly they achieved rationality. After getting out of the tent, they go about a kilometer, and by the time they get a kilometer, they're totally rational again. Except they won't go back to the tent, which is the only irrational thing that they're... And then at some point they finally decide we have to go back to the tent, and it's too late, and none of them make it. You had a comment.
So basically, we're saying that the tent location suddenly became so dangerous, they're basically trying to survive without approaching close.
Yes.
But they walked from, not ran from the danger.
That is what the people who did the first investigation, which are their friends, said that the footprints were not widely spaced. So it appeared to indicate, because it's very easy to see in snow if somebody's running in snow and leaving tracks that way, or if they're walking in snow. So, and that's one of the reasons why this makes absolutely no sense to me, okay? And if you were looking for me to come up with the answer to this today, I apologize greatly, because I haven't got a thing here. Yes?
If it was Soviets, wouldn't there be some kind of documentation on it?
You didn't grow up in the Cold War. Okay? So, now, the Soviets documented some things, and other things they made sure didn't get documented. So, and again, a lot of things showed up when the Soviet Union collapsed and their archives were opened, but very little information on this event did. So it could have been that, yes, there was documentation. It may not have come out yet, but the Soviets were really good at saying things sometimes and really good at not saying things other times. So a lot depended on who was telling you not to write that report. If you look at the Chernobyl incident, there's a lot of things that weren't written about that. An even bigger one is the East Urals radioactive trace, which was a huge incident that happened 2 years before this, where the Soviets had a plutonium waste storage tank blow up. Okay? Now, one thing I looked at was that incident compared to this incident in terms of locations, because I wanted to see if maybe our two radioactive contaminated people somehow got something from that. But these are hundreds of miles apart, so that didn't check out either. So it could have been, and one of the investigators lived until about 2015, and he said basically that his boss came in and shut everything down. So, which was also very typical of the Soviet Union.
Was it possible that, like you said, that there were bits of hardware in that area? Is it possible? I know it's a doozy of a coinkydink, but that some like a shell went off somewhere.
But there's no evidence of it. There's no crater. There's no blast on the tent. And again, if the three people who suffered trauma at the tent, there's no way with the level of trauma that they experienced that they could have made it down the slope. Okay? Because the footprints allegedly did not show them being carried. It showed 8 or 9 people walking down the slope. So if they were that badly injured, there is absolutely no way that they could have physically moved. Oh, absolutely. The trauma was almost, especially a bilateral skull crushing, that's pretty much instantly fatal. Yeah.
What was the average slope of that
I think it's like maybe 15%. It's not very big. It's not.
And with the section you called the ravine, was it?
It
was
was-
it like an actual ravine?
Yes.
Or, and
And
that's
it's
where
about-
the snow shelter was underneath of it.
Yeah. So they cut out a snow cave on the side of that ravine and tried to survive in that. But the funny thing is that was found, the snow den they made, which is a snow den is a technique that is taught in the Red Army as a survival technique in deep snow. So the older gentleman who had been in the Soviet Army during World War II would clearly have known how to do that. And apparently he was one of the 4 people there, and he's the one without trauma. So it's likely he dug that. Now, the skeptics will tell you that the trauma was either post-mortem, and it was caused by the snow collapsing on the bodies post-mortem, or they fell into this ravine. But the ravine, apparently, from most discussion of it, was full of snow and not deep enough to cause that level of traumatic injury.
If you fall on rocks,
Right.
can you get that level of trauma?
It depends on how far you fall.
With this,
But in this scenario, from
Yeah.
people who've looked into this, they say no. They say it's unlikely that you would get that level of trauma.
Because I was gonna ask about if they'd fallen from the tree earlier, would they have sort of dragged them to, no?
No, the tree's about 75 meters away, and the tree was only 5 meters tall. So if you fall 15 feet, you're not likely to get a bilateral skull crushing incident. Unless you do a 1.5 gainer and a full twist and, land on a rock. But again, there's probably 2 feet of snow there.
What is the timeline from the beginning of the incident to the death of the people in the snow cave?
So, from the contents of their stomachs, they died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. So the incident took place in a very few hours.
Okay.
Probably maybe an hour after they ate, whatever happened, and then they spend the last 5-6 hours of their life, maybe less, out in the snow. So it is a very rapid set of circumstances that go from them being asleep in the tent to them being dead in the forest, or the snow, or the ravine.
Because the cold is brutal.
Oh my God, it's like 20 to 50 below.
Yeah.
So if you're out there in your skivvies, you're not going to last very long.
How did they start the fire? Like, I mean, if you're running out of the tent in your skivvies, are you gonna have?
Somebody may have,
steel?
they probably had lighters because, even though they weren't drunk, they probably smoked because they were Russians.
But why would you grab a lighter and not grab a coat
You might have had the lighter
in your sleep?
in your sleeping bag or close, or maybe they just got lucky and somebody got it. The one that bothers me is why they had a camera.
Yeah.
So,
When I was a young hiker long ago and far away, I always had a bag, a quick grab bag.
right, I did too.
When I would get into a sleeping bag.
Right. So when I hiked, when I was in the service, I had a set of load-bearing equipment, load-bearing suspenders that had a first aid kit, it had a fire kit, it had a canteen, it had some beef jerky, so that if I had to, pardon my French, unass in a hurry, I could grab that and get out. Okay. Apparently nobody had anything like that because it just wasn't found. So, but again, yeah, I know what you're saying, but apparently nobody had that. One of the newest theories is this infrasound theory. Has anybody heard this? No pun intended.
Is that the embassy issue?
No, that's a different thing. So I think, but this is totally not related to that.
Is this like the low sound that causes some people to see ghosts or whatever?
And panic and all that other stuff that may be caused by wind moving through certain geological, topographical features. There's a book on Dyatlov Pass that is very serious about the infrasound being the cause. The problem is that infrasound will actually, you can pick it up because there's some infrasound areas down in the southwest. First, it doesn't affect everybody the same way. It only affects a certain percentage of people. Second, it will show up on things like really sensitive seismographs and other things that pick up vibration. Third, it's never been observed in this area. There were people looking for those last 4 folks for 2 months, and they never said, oh my gosh, they camped in basically the same area. So I just find it difficult to believe that that's what made them leave the tent. Secondly, it does not explain the traumatic injuries. I was very excited when I read the book and got about halfway through, and then I started poking holes in this one. So again, I'm not a supporter. Okay, so that's what I've got. Okay, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But as I said, I haven't got an answer to this one. It's one that kind of keeps me up at night. One of the things that we really studied when we did search and rescue was human behavior. Because in search and rescue, finding the person is 90% of it is knowing what they're going to do when they become lost. Okay? And the folks in this one don't do what you would expect them to do. And they don't do it at least twice. One is when they leave the tent, you don't expect them to do that. 2, when they don't return to the tent, you don't expect them to do that. So there is some stuff you do expect them to do, but it's under some odd circumstances. One is you do expect them to start a fire. 2, you do expect them to build a snow den. But by the time they do either of those, it's too late, really. And when they do attempt to return to the tent, they don't make it.
Was there evidence that they actually got the fire started?
Yes. There was evidence that that fire had been started.
How?
When they got there, there was a fire.
No, I mean, if they don't have any clothes.
Well, and again, that was a question that she asked, and I don't have an answer to that. So I'm not exactly sure. I may have to look at it more closely. He's actually first.
Okay, so with the missing tongue.
Yes.
I read that was probably some animal that thought the inside of her mouth smelled like food.
Yeah, it was probably post-mortem, because again, she's the one found in the ravine. The ravine has thawed and refrozen several times, so it's not unlikely that there were animals that got into that area. So, and that's why I think that the whole missing tongue thing is really sort of a red herring. So,
Why would you cut an opening in a tent like that when you could just go out the
got no
flaps?
clue. Don't have a clue.
I mean, looking at cases beyond this, are you aware of any other examples where some other parties have done something like that?
Nope.
A little bit more broad than yes, like, are you aware of any cases of anything like this whatsoever?
Nope. There is what's called the American Dyatlov Pass Incident, which is 4 guys in a car who disappeared up in the mountains, and I think it's California. A couple of them were special needs, but they were high functioning. And they get found scattered all over the place. And in fact, one gets found in like a campground in one of the huts in this campground. And he'd been eating the food there, but he didn't eat it all, and then he didn't turn the heat on, and he dies of hypothermia. And there's a whole bunch of, they find all the bodies, and there's 4 of these guys. Do a search for the American Dyatlov Pass Incident, and I'm not super up on it, but it is really odd. But I don't think it's really that similar to this incident, except that people were running around doing things that seemed really strange. And that incident apparently took place over a period of weeks for the last guy to die, because he had like a full beard that he had not had when he disappeared. And that falls into that missing 411 national park stuff. Okay. So, yes, sir.
I guess the other question would be, how competent, and that's probably not a fair way to express this, the post-mortem examination by, who did it? Were they?
That's a good question. So, And again, it's difficult to answer if this, you know, was a Soviet era medical examiner, could he be trusted to put down what's real? Or did somebody say, hey, put down something else? So it's very difficult to take a lot of that at its face value. And again, but you've got to go with the, well, thank you.
Yeah, I have to go, but wonderful panel and it was awesome.
Thank you. So if everybody else wants to say that, that's really great. But again, it's a very interesting incident. There's enough evidence that you can kind of peel back some layers. Some of the evidence is questionable. It is definitely questionable, the medical examiner's reports. It would be interesting to disinter the bodies now and see what goes on with them. People have been up and down that area since then in significant numbers. No one else has disappeared, no one has seen a Yeti, no one's heard infrasound, no one's been attacked by a Soviet aircraft or giant robot or, you know, none of that. So this incident has not repeated itself in that area. This incident did not repeat itself before then. It's questionable about why the Mansi called this area Dead Mountain. So there's a lot of questions, and I think this is one of the really mysterious events that's been documented. The Mary Celeste I don't think is a big deal. Some of the Bermuda Triangle stuff I'm not so sure about. But this one has enough evidence and enough facts around it that you can really start looking at it.
Yeah, I noticed on your slide that you had, like, it was questionable whether or not this was sacred land for the Mansi.
Right, it was questionable.
That? I mean, is it like, they just call it, oh, that's Death Mountain?
Right, and so some people say yes, it's sacred land to them, and other people say no, it's not.
What do they say?
They don't really talk much about it. I mean, I've never seen a good ethnography on the Mansi, and I think that might be someplace that's fruitful to look at. So, again, if there's any of that in English, I'm not sure about it, but I think that's a really good question.
That was going to be my question. Has anyone looked into their myths or talked to them about it?
Well, they did. The Mansi were questioned at the time and denied having anything to do with the group.
Did they have any explanation
No.
for what's going on with the
Nope.
mountain?
Nope. Didn't have anything of value to add to the investigation, as far as I can see.
So the people in the snow cave, did they all die like, I mean, obviously very shortly between each other? Is there an order for the four of them down there?
Again, nobody can tell. So they're pretty sure that they were the last four to die, but the question is, the other interesting thing is that they were, it seems like whatever traumatic events happened to them, the last survivor, who was the guy who died of hypothermia, laid out the other three bodies in sort of a position of repose, and then he perished. So, because they actually were just out, they were some distance from the snow den. So they weren't even in the snow den, they were in the ravine itself.
So he like drug them out?
Or they died trying to get back in, or something. So again, it's really, the evidence is very contradictory. It does not paint a coherent picture of anything. There's none of the theories that have been expressed can survive scrutiny. Every theory that's been expressed can be debunked.
Which of the three groups was Dyatlov actually found?
He was in the group headed back to the tent. And the interesting thing is, he's found on his back with his hands up like this when he froze, which is not a position you would expect to find somebody who freezes to death. The other two dropped in their tracks and were found face down in the snow. So there was some question about maybe he had a seizure, because this is a position, it's called posturing, that a lot of times somebody who's got a neurological injury or suffers a seizure, they go into this posturing position. But it could be just luck of the draw on that one. So
There was no footprints other than their own?
None were found. So,
And we have these multiple layers of the clothing on of the two that were found naked? Was some of
The
three-
people in the snow den had the most clothes.
Okay.
So it's likely they were the last to die. So, yep.
What would be a good book you'd recommend reading really goes into that long?